Hey friends, welcome to the Angie Ambrosetti Show. Let her out to play. I'm Angie, your host, a teenage mom turned multi-six-figure earner, married to the same man for nearly 40 years. I'm a homeschooling mom of 7 and totally unqualified, at least on paper, but wildly called by God. Remember, He doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Here, we are going to talk about it all. Healing from the hard stuff, building a business with heart, raising a big family, walking in faith, and finally breaking free from the lies that said we weren't enough. So if you're ready to stop playing small, shake off the doubt and the shame, and step fully into who you were created to be, girl, you are in the right place. Let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Angie Ambrosetti Show. I am so excited to be here with you again. I know I say that every single time I do a recording, but it's the truth. I pray over, I get so pumped up about my guests that are going to be on the show. And I think today, I know that today you're really going to enjoy my guest that I have on. She is a mom of 3. She herself was adopted. And she's been married to her sweetheart for 20 years this year, I think she said. And so we met kind of by happenstance, I think actually through social media. And as it turns out, her husband is our UPS man. So we've kind of giggled about that many times off and on, that's her husband maybe was our contact. We don't even know, but it's just a fun little story, something that we can hold on to. So if you would please help me welcome my guest today. Katie King, I'm so excited for her to be here, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear her story. So, welcome to the show today, friend.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And she actually beat me to the my office this morning, so she was here ready to go, and I was helping my son get some things prepared for homeschooling. So, Katie, if you would just tell us a little bit about your story, about your adoption story.
So I am 43. I was adopted as an infant. And as I've told Angie before, my birth mother was actually 13 years old when she found out that she was pregnant with me. And so she was already in a really bad situation with an unstable family life, a mother that was really not there very much, kind of in and out of the picture. And her mother just decided that she was going to have me put up for adoption. And so I've told Angie just a little bit that I've learned a lot about adoption. I actually learned that I was adopted from, honestly, I can't remember when. My parents had a book. It was called Where Do Babies Come From? And so it kind of had a little bit of information about when you're born into your birth family, or when you're born and then brought into an adoptive family. And so I've never not known, or I don't have a recollection of never knowing I was not adopted. And so as I got older, I did a preference by saying, first of all, my family that I was adopted into is absolutely amazing. You would never guess that we were not their biological children. They have
Mhm.
always loved us as so. And just, it's an amazing thing to watch somebody else be able to have someone else's child come into their home and it basically become theirs. They wouldn't think otherwise. And, they have been absolutely amazing and wonderful. Now, for me as an adoptee, and maybe some of it is because I knew from so early on. I'm really not sure on that, but I did have a lot of issues from very early on. I had kind of talked about, there's a book out by Nancy Newton, and it's called The Primal Wound. And it kind of dives into people that have been adopted or may have been abandoned, or later in life they live through foster care and such. And so I just kind of want to tell you a little bit about what the theory of primal wound is. So it talks about it develops when a mother and child are separated by adoption shortly after childbirth. And it says that the mother and child have a vital connected relationship, which is physical, psychological, physiological, and examines the effects of disrupting in the bones. So, what they find then is when this happens, it can be seen shortly after. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But then it also talks about the long term effects on the adoptive child. And so those are things that it often manifests later in life. And it usually will be masked as depression, anxiety, existential angst, sense of impending doom, sense of meaningless, complex post traumatic stress disorder, other emotional and behavioral difficulties, often that comes in the form of addiction, codependency, people pleasing, so forth and so on.
Mhm.
Um, which I found that book absolutely amazing because I had so many questions as a child. So I um, am very different than my adoptive parents. There's the nature versus the nurture. And nature wise, I don't look a lot like them. We don't have the same body type. We don't have the same metabolism for sure. And then we also have very different personalities. And although it wasn't ever something that was meant to be harmful, I was often told as a young child that I was always too loud or I was too much or, you don't need to do all that. And um, so it was definitely was brought to my attention often
Mhm.
that I was not like them. And so I started to see that. And as a female and a teenager, as normal hormones start going and you start getting restless, I think that was just kind of, catastrophized with the adoption and the feelings that were inside of me. And so I did spend most of my middle and high school life really thinking about the differences in the adoption, what was wrong with me, um, and so forth and so on. And so later in life, it did come back and manifest in me as depression, anxiety, weight gain was a big one for me. And there was two aspects of that. One is I just chose to eat my feelings instead of feeling them. And it is also, I've learned, a genetic thing as well with my birth family. But I actually wound up gaining up to 300 pounds. And then later began to drink alcohol after never having an issue with it. I later then chose to seek that. But in doing so, I actually, it kind of was a lifesaver. It, it really brought attention to all the things that I've been dealing with that I thought, this really isn't that big a deal when in actuality, it was a big deal. And
Yeah.
so I was able to seek help and really dive into what was behind all of this, which brought me back to that primal wound.
Yeah.
And so, what I found interesting was learning about how the rejection of being adopted as an infant, before even knowing anything was going on, I
Mhm.
had already started to protect myself. And so, in my situation, I was born. I bonded with my birth mother for 2 days, and then we were removed from each other. And so that was very hard on me as an infant without me even knowing it. And then I actually went to a foster home for 6 weeks, bonded with my foster parents, who were wonderful, took very good care of me. And then after 6 weeks, I was removed from that home. And so by the time that I got to my adoptive family, even my adoptive mom was blown away when I was telling her this theory because most children like to be cuddled and comforted and held. And every time someone would get close to me as an infant, 6 weeks old, I would literally take my hands and push them away from me. And so I learned that that was when, even at that age, I just started to learn to push people away and I'm not going to get hurt. I don't want to be rejected. Then that kind of led into a lifelong of also codependency, people pleasing. I want to make sure everyone likes me because I would hate for someone to not like me. And then I'm
Right.
being rejected once again. And so
Mhm.
that has been a huge thing that I've dealt
Yeah.
with.
Well, it's interesting because, our boys, our 3 that we have adopted, so one, the oldest one was about 22 months when we got him, and so when you mentioned, in our conversation that we had last week about that, like, my brain started twirling, and I started thinking about different things, the young about with the boys, and the younger 2, um so one was about a week old, but he had been in the NICU because he was a preemie, but he had had like one bonding moment with his birth mother, and then the youngest one had didn't have any bonding moment at all. Like we got him like basically the instantly when he was born. And as I think back, I can see things like what you're talking about, and I've got to get the book because I got to read it because like I just want to learn more and more about it. And honestly, I forgot to say this at the beginning of the podcast, but you are the first, other than my own children, adoptee. I've had women on here who have adopted children, but they were not adopted themselves. So I was just thinking about that as we were talking. But the book, like, yeah, I definitely want to give a plug for that when we post the podcast because I want people to be able to identify with that. Because when I think back to some of the things with my boys, I can definitely see some of those things, especially with the two that had any type of bonding moment with their birth mom.
Yeah, and we talked about that last week,
Yeah.
and that it was amazing through my recovery, just like you having the different experiences with the different backgrounds of your boys. You know,
Hmm.
I had a friend who was also adopted. She and her sister were both adopted by different birth families, and they have totally different experiences. So she had one similar to mine.
Hmm.
She bonded with her birth mother, and then was removed. And so she and I connect and we understand and we have the same feelings. Now, her sister, on the other hand, who was also adopted, her birth mother gave birth to her, but her adoptive parents were literally standing right next to them when
Mm.
she had the baby. And so
Yeah.
the baby was handed straight from the birth mother into the adoptive parents' hands. And
Yeah.
that child doesn't understand those fears, that rejection. She said, I just don't know why you feel that. And so that alone, it just blew my mind when she said that. And that's when I started researching and learning. And I was like, wow, that makes total sense.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, some of our listeners have heard me say this before, but because my youngest two, I did nurse them. And that gave us an opportunity to have that bonding. I know right now people's minds are being completely blown because they've never heard of that before. But actually, I had some time to prepare my body and was able to nurse the youngest two. And I 100% believe the Lord gave me that because of not even knowing, but like what you're even talking about right now is like, being able to have those bonding moments. And my youngest two were born addicted to drugs. And so I just know that that was that God wink that he gave me and helped us have that bonding that, I certainly didn't wasn't able to do with my son who came at 22 months, obviously.
yeah, that's
But
incredible.
it's just interesting to hear, there's been so much research done on, adoption, whether you're the birth mom or whether you're the adoptive parents and whether you're the child, the adoptee. And, it's fascinating. And the more I get into this series with adoption, like the deeper I want to dive so that I can always help, my boys or whomever comes across my path that's had some experience with this. And with November being National Adoption Month, I just love that it just fell right into place for us to do this podcast series this month. But what would you say has been your relationship? I know you have an adoptive brother that you both were raised in the same home. So tell us a little bit about that. And then also, what about your birth family? If you would just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So my adoptive brother is roughly 3.5 years older than I am. And he and I, to be honest, we have never been close our entire lives. I hope one day that will change. But we too, in some ways, we're very different, but in some ways, we are very much the same.
Hmm.
My adoptive mom, and I use that very liberally because she is my mom, but just in reference, my adoptive mom said, when my brother turned 16, she gave him a letter from his birth parents that explained why they gave him up and how much they loved him and they wanted the very best for him. And at that point in time, he got in a lot of trouble growing up. He had a lot of, anger issues and things. And so my mom just felt like this is the time you need to read this letter. And so I was very heartbroken because I said, well, where's my letter? and I didn't get a letter. And
Mm.
so my mom said, when we both came, she asked where my letter was when I got there, and they're like, that's not typical. And so I guess for my brother, that may have been at the time enough to kind of help things. And my brother and I, unfortunately, do not talk anymore due to multiple reasons. One, and I don't want to say this because I don't know for sure this is his feelings. This is what I have been told, is
Mhm.
that he feels betrayed that I have chosen to have a relationship. I found my birth family and I've chosen to continue to have a relationship with them. He feels as if that's betraying my adoptive family. Whereas
Mhm.
honestly, my adoptive parents could not have been more supportive. They actually helped me find her. They helped the first time I met her, they went with me. We spend time together when we're all here. They are not a threat in any way. They've only
Mhm.
added more joy to the family. And so I hate that that may be a big confrontation between the two of us. I don't know. I do know, we all make bad choices throughout life. We all learn from them, and we never
Mhm.
get a testimony without having a test.
Yeah.
And since it's November, adoption month, and Thanksgiving, being thankful. The one thing I am grateful for, and I hope one day that I can tell him this, is that when I was at my very lowest, he unfortunately was a part of um, an instance that was kind of the turning point for myself. But it is because of him that it made me stop and say, all right, this enough is enough. I have got to change my life. Like this is so self-destructive, and I'm going downhill fast. And because he literally put it right in front of me and was like, I have to do something. So even though we don't get along and we don't speak, I can't be anything more than forever grateful to him for putting that in front of me. And I don't know how he feels about adoption. He's not a very open person. He's a wonderful person. He's an incredible asset to our community. Um, he's a wonderful father, a wonderful husband. We just, it's just not something that we apparently have. But like I said,
Mhm.
hopefully in the future, if that's what God wants, there will be a
Yeah.
way and there will be a time.
Mhm.
But anyway, so I think he does have a story. We've just never talked about it. So I don't know,
Yeah.
but I do know he has always felt very protective of my adoptive parents and the whole adoptive family as a
Yeah.
whole.
Mhm.
Now, for me, feel that way, but I also feel like because I am so different. And adoption is such a big part of me, and the primal wound has affected me so much.
Yeah.
For me to reach out, and honestly, it was a total God thing that I met my birth family. So in high school, I was doing a project it was supposed to be on your family roots. And so I asked permission if I could actually do it on the search for my biological family. And my adoptive parents said, if that's what you want to do, then we'll support that. And so I had previously, before then, since seventh grade, I've been putting out my information to all these adoption sites where you can try and reconnect with somebody, because mine was a closed private adoption.
Mhm.
And I'd never heard anything, never got any information. And in the process, my foster parents kind of gave me the exact information of all of the facts. And so I went back and I was going to go back and change multiple sites, but I'd only gotten to where I changed one. And within, it was either days or a week, I actually received an email from my birth mother stating that she could not believe she had found me. She was dead sure, you are my daughter. And so I immediately ran home and told my adoptive mom, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think we found each other. And of course, you know, the web had just started and you never know who you're talking to on the other side. And so, of
Yeah.
course, she was very responsible and very cautious about it. And she's like, we need more information. We need some sort of documentation, something before I even let you have any further contact.
Yeah.
And so she just sent some basic information about herself. And then she sent her senior picture, a current picture, and then there was a baby picture at the very bottom. Well, the senior picture alone kind of gave it away. It was like I was a senior at the time. It was like watching my senior picture come up till about right here. And then we're different from here down. But we were just like, oh my gosh. And then of course we saw the current picture, and then up came the baby picture. And my adoptive mother did not say anything, but she left the room. I remember I was sitting in the kitchen at the computer and she just leaves and then she comes back and she hands me a picture. And it's the exact picture that was on
Ugh,
the screen. And so the adoptive facility had taken a picture, given one to my birth mother. It was the only picture she had of me, and one to my adoptive parents. So for any reason we met by some crazy miracle, we would have that. And of course, we did later confirm also with the adoption agency. But what's funny is that all of my life, I've written, so I have written multiple things. So I have a poem that I wrote about my birth mother. I should have brought it, but I didn't. And funny story is I have a daughter named Rachel, and I completely forgot that I named her Rachel. And I did not remember that until my mom gave me all these old papers. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then Renee is my daughter's middle name. And my birth name was Stephanie Renee Hare. So I wanted to use just a piece of that
yeah,
in my family. And so growing up, I always wanted somebody to just recognize me and be like, oh my gosh, she's related to so and so. I just thought, would that not be the best thing? Because I don't act like anybody else. Like if somebody just knew like that is her. And
yeah.
so when we did meet my birth mother, we were actually had flown to Texas to go meet her, and we were in a hotel and we were walking down the hall on our way to go meet my birth mother. And these two women that worked at the hotel walked by us. And the older woman looked at the other lady and she said, that's my little niece's daughter. And my adoptive mom stopped her. She said, excuse me, what did you say? And she said, oh, that's Denise's daughter. I know, she looks just like her. And I was blown away that like all these things just like came into
Yeah.
play, and it was phenomenal. And so I will say one thing, if anybody that's searching, I am very lucky in that for the most part, it has been a positive experience. And that's
Mhm.
not true for everyone.
Yeah.
And you have to prepare yourself for that. And that is one thing my adopted parents were very good about. They just kept saying, you just don't know the circumstances. You don't know why they gave you up. You don't know what their current circumstances or what they've been through is. And we
Mhm.
talked about that over and over and over before I even knew her. And I think that actually helped because my birth mother being 13, she then, after being pregnant, her mother actually kicked her out, put her in foster care, and she spent the rest of her childhood in foster care. And
Mm.
so she has similar feelings to what I feel. But she also turned to drugs, alcohol, and men then for the next, I don't know how many years. And so I have six other sisters, three in one age group, and then you go another decade, and I have three more in another age group. And so it kind of was not a shock because my adoptive parents and I had kind of talked about this,
Mhm.
that it's not always a great scenario. And so it definitely took some time to understand, but I can now see where, at times it could be hard to get along with her and
Yeah.
talk to her. She's in a different place. She didn't grow up the way I did. And so my nurture part has blessed me beyond measure in
Mhm.
terms of the kindness, the love, the compassion, the thoughtfulness, everything that I would have lacked, I got, and I got
Yeah.
125%,
Mm.
and so I just want to be sure people realize it doesn't always happen. And it wasn't perfect. I still, we went a decade in between there to where I didn't even
Mhm.
speak to my birth mother. It's very
Yeah.
hard, her being 13.
Yeah.
Um, but we have reconnected again. And I've also gotten to know my sisters more. In fact, when I first met my birth mother, the whole time, of course, as a kid, you think me, and all
Mhm.
of my thoughts and my fears. And the next sister down from me, she actually said when we first met, she said, "I don't like you." I was like, "What?" And she said, "Why did you get adopted?" And I didn't. And I thought, "Why would you say that? You
Mhm.
had to spend your whole life with your birth mother." And she was like, "It's horrible. I've gone through drugs addiction. I've gone through, you know, my mother being promiscuous. I've gone through her being an alcoholic. She threw a hot iron, missed my face, but she's just like, why did you get a good life and I didn't?" And I'd never thought about that. Like,
Yeah.
it really turned your perspective around that there's a lot of hurt in the entire triangle.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that's another thing to remember. And I definitely also learned to sympathize with my adopted mother, which I'd never thought of either.
Mhm.
There are cases that the reasons why people adopt is because they can't have children.
Yeah.
And we forget as the adoptee, we forget that, yeah, it was a joy, it was a gift for them to have us, but what did they have to go through to get to
Mm.
that point? What did they suffer from? What depression are they going through?
Mhm.
What loss have they endured? I know my mom had numerous miscarriages, and I didn't learn
Mhm.
that until later in life. And then you learn, oh my gosh, I've had a miscarriage now, and I can't imagine going through that multiple times. It about
Yeah.
destroyed me. And so it's amazing to see and to become just more grateful, more understanding, more compassionate for each person in that triangle.
Mhm. And so was that your adopted mom's could she not, could she not carry pregnancy to term?
Right. So
Mhm.
she had uh endometriosis really bad. And so
Okay, yeah.
she would get pregnant, but I think she could only I don't even know that she could carry for a full trimester. And then a, s- a couple more years went by, she actually had, I believe it was, I don't remember if it was this. No, it was not a skiing accident. Something happened to where it may have been the endometriosis, and she
Mm,
wound up having to have an emergency hysterectomy. And so there was no way she was ever going to have any children. Mhm.
mhm. I got you. Well, I mean, the truth is that we don't really know what the scenario is. And, thinking back to your birth mom being 13, it's very understandable that she would choose adoption at that young age. I did have a guest on the podcast that was 13 when she gave birth, and she did end up keeping her child and ended up marrying the birth dad a few years later. But I mean, honestly, like that's not the normal story. It just
Right.
really isn't. And whenever you said that your biological sister said to you, you're the lucky one. Like
Yeah.
you got adopted, we didn't. That is something I had never ever thought about because my boys, they have biological siblings out there that stayed with their birth parents. And so I don't know their story, so I don't wanna, second guess that at all, but, that's something that I really had never thought about. But the one thing that I have thought about, um, over the years and, you know, I was a little bit nervous even when we told our boys they were adopted because they were 12, 15, and 18 when they found out. They do somewhat look like the rest of our family, and it's all they've ever known. I hate to s they weren't shocked by it. They were like, "Oh, that's weird, like, we're not," whatever, "Nothing's changing," sort of thing. But the thing as an adoptive mother, the thing that I have always feared is them wanting to seek out their birth parents, and that's just an honest moment here.
Yeah.
It has been a little bit, I've thought about that a lot, and the Lord put me in the path of a couple years ago. I was in a group of women that some of them I didn't know, and I got in a group, but there were 3 of us, and one of these women, she was a birth mom, and I didn't know this, but as soon as we started talking and she started telling her story about that, like, I started weeping because I knew that the Lord had put her in my tight little circle for me to get to know her and understand her, and she has a relationship with her son now, but she's not a threat to, you know, the adoptive family. Just like you said, like your birth parents are not a threat to your, adoptive parents. And so just all these things are so good. And I just want to say, I am learning so much. I'm doing this podcast for so many, but I think it's really impacting me more because I'm learning so much from different conversations that I've had from women who are the birth moms to women who are the adoptive moms to women who are the adoptee. And I love that. I appreciate it so much. So thank you for the goodness that you have shared with me on today. And then, as we met last week for lunch and just talked about those things. But I would also like to ask you, um, what would you say to someone out there who is adopted themselves and they're kind of in between, like, do I want to seek out my birth parents, do I not? Our children at this point, they don't have any desire to do that, But what if there was someone listening to the podcast today and they're like, I've kind of been vacillating, like I'm not really sure.
I think honestly that that really needs to be a personal journey, and
Hmm.
I wouldn't necessarily encourage them one way that or the other.
Hmm.
For me personally, it was something that I needed, and later in life, it became kind of a saving grace for me. It helped me to understand and to turn my life around. Now, some people may find that it's more devastating than it is helpful. And
Hmm.
so, when they're thinking about it, are they emotionally ready to handle whatever it is that they may find? Because
Hmm.
it's not, I don't think it's usually a typical ending that it turns out okay, or that it
Hmm.
turns out that you get to continue. That's not the norm. And so I think God knew what he was doing with me. He knew why I needed it. And so you just have to I would just say, think about it. Why do you want to know them? Is there something that you feel like you need for yourself, that you need healing, you need
Hmm.
peace, you need to understand? Is there a medical reason? That's one thing when you go into a medical facility. Up until I met her, I would have to write, I'm adopted. I don't know. And so
Hmm.
you go in and they're like, oh, well, is this part of your family history? Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, do you have some sort of medical reason as to why you need to know what your genetics are and what that medical history is? That would be something else to consider.
Yeah.
And then, if you don't feel like you could actually handle it, and it might actually send you into a spiral, or you feel strongly, like my brother does, he feels strongly that it is just something you don't do.
Hmm.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That if he
Yeah.
feels that strongly, then I would not push somebody and say, you've got to go meet them. Like you have to. I just, yes, for me, it was absolutely the best thing, hands down. But you have to decide if you're ready to understand, to work through,
Hmm.
and to live with whatever it is that unfolds when you do that. And so, if you really feel the need to, I encourage you to,
Hmm.
but you have to go in with an open mind, eyes wide open. You're not blinded by, oh, this is,
Yeah.
and maybe as you get older, that's something that you can do a little bit better. So maybe you need to wait a little bit.
Hmm.
But if you just strongly feel like I just don't feel like it's right, don't feel like you have to. It's not something you have to do. And it may be something that they don't want you to find them. That can
Yeah.
happen sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because I have chatted with several different people who they kind of have that scenario. Like they either are afraid that their birth parents don't want them to be found, and or on the opposite end, birth parents who they don't want to have the connection, not because they don't love the child or the adult now, but because it's a part of their life that you know, they don't wanna bring back up, like, they don't wanna dig that back up again, and so, across the board, I think it's something that has to be respected on both ends, you know?
mhm,
Um, our first adoption was, more so an open adoption. We did meet the birth mother, and then the other 2, it was a closed adoption, so I guess if the Lord sees fit for that to be open at some point. But like I said, our boys aren't looking to that. But I
mhm.
know that there are going to be listeners today who are thinking about these things and they're going to
Sometimes I
wonder.
think one thing that triggers them is when you have your own children.
Yeah.
So sometimes they may not think it's a big deal. Then all of a sudden they have a child and they're like, oh,
Hmm.
well, I wonder what they were like. I went, and so that may, you never know when it's going to hit. So
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, my friend, it has been a pleasure to have you on today. And I'm sure that our listeners are going to learn so much. And would you tell us one more time what the name of the book is? Maybe,
yes,
I
and
don't know.
let
I
me
should
get
have
there.
had you bring it. You could have held it
Yeah,
up.
you know what? I thought on the way, I was like, why did I not bring that with me? But I'm gonna pull it up so I can tell you the authors. So it is called The Primal Wound,
Okay.
and it's by Nancy Newton. Here, I'm gonna actually show you. So
Okay.
this is what it looks like.
Primal wound. Okay.
Primal Wound, Nancy Newton. It is phenomenal. It
Yeah.
it really gives you a lot of insight, even if you're an adoptive parent who never wants to tell their child.
Yeah.
It will help you understand there may be some things that they do and they have no control over. Like I had no control over at 6 weeks old, pushing everyone out of my life.
Yeah.
I just something I instinctively did. And so if
Hmm.
you're wondering, why is my kid doing this, but they don't know they're adopted and I don't, just read it. I
Yeah.
think it would definitely be an eye opener, and you just learn all the way around some
Mhm.
information on adoption itself.
Well, one of the things I was thinking earlier when we were recording and when you were talking about that and just not knowing about pushing someone away or whatever, it was reminding me of what I call the golden key in my life coaching that I do with many clients. And it says the way in which I relate to myself directly creates and impacts my relationships and my circumstances. And as a 6 week old, obviously you had no control over that, but you did mention that as you got older and there were different things that you became addicted to with, eating and other addictions that you've had. And I 100% believe that the way that we relate to ourselves
Yes.
is how we show up. It's how we, respond to people in every single circumstance. And so being able to think that through and help people myself, I didn't have addictions like that and I wasn't adopted. However, I know that that statement has been so impactful in how I relate to who I am, how you relate to who you are, and the birth parents versus the adoptive parents and how the Lord has used that in your life. So I'm just so excited that you were able to come on today and share your story. And I know that our listeners are going to be impacted. So thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for those of you listening, I just want to remind you, be sure to give us a 5-star rating, give us a written review. And I'm going to pop this book in the show notes so that if this story has impacted you, or maybe you've been touched by adoption in some way, you'll take a look at this book and say, now we're not getting any compensation for this. I'm just sharing it because I think it's worth it. So, anyways, thanks so much for tuning in today to the Angie Ambrosetti Show, and we'll see you next time on the podcast. That's it for today, friends. Thanks for tuning in with me today. I hope today's episode stirred your soul, sparked your faith, and reminded you that your story is far from over. Keep walking in freedom, keep showing up bold, and never forget, God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Be sure to leave a review, subscribe, or share this podcast with a friend who needs to hear it as well. Until next time, keep letting her out to play because the world needs your fire.